Someone finally said it. "Show us." The room went quiet for a moment. Most people expected Bruce Lee to step forward and demonstrate something. Instead, he walked away. It was a small room, maybe 20-25 people. Not a stadium, not a press event, a training session. The kind where people show up prepared to work, not to watch. Most of the people in that room had been studying martial arts for years. Some of them were instructors themselves. They weren't students in the beginner sense of the word. They were serious. And they had come specifically because Bruce Lee was going to be there. Not to meet him, not to take photos, to observe, to learn, to see if what they'd heard about him was actually true. That kind of expectation has a weight to it. You don't always notice it at first, but it's there in the way people position themselves. In the way a room goes a little quieter when someone walks in. Bruce Lee walked in. The room adjusted. He didn't make an entrance. He simply came in, acknowledged a few people, and moved toward the center of the space. The way he moved, even just walking, was different. Not performed, not self-conscious. He moved the way someone moves when they've spent thousands of hours inside their own body. Economy, precision, nothing extra. The people watching picked up on it immediately, not because it was dramatic, because it wasn't. And that was more interesting than anything dramatic could have been. For a few minutes, the session continued normally. Discussion, questions, observation. Then one person shifted the tone. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't a challenge in the hostile sense. It was just a question, the kind that feels perfectly reasonable in the moment. "Show us." 2 words. The request was simple. Demonstrate a technique. Walk us through it. Let us see. The person who asked wasn't being difficult. They were doing what everyone in that room was thinking. You have Bruce Lee in front of you. Of course you want to see him move. Of course you want to see the thing work. The rest of the room leaned in slightly. Not, obviously, just forward. The way people do when they're waiting for something. There was a pause. Bruce Lee looked at the person who had asked. He didn't look uncomfortable. He didn't look dismissive. He just looked clear. And then he stepped back, quietly walked to the side of the room. And that was it. He didn't say no. He didn't explain himself. There was no speech, no lesson statement, no dramatic pause before wisdom. He simply moved out of the center of the space, found a position at the edge of the room, and the floor, the place where he had been standing, was empty. The person who had asked the question didn't say anything. Nobody did. For a moment the room was just suspended, like a sentence without an ending. Some people looked at each other. A few looked at Bruce Lee. He wasn't watching them watch him. He was watching the room, waiting. For what? Nobody quite understood yet. The thing about confusion is that most people want to resolve it quickly. When something doesn't fit the pattern, the brain starts working immediately. Did something offend him? Was the request inappropriate? Was there something about the question nobody else noticed? People replayed it in their heads. The words had been simple enough. Respectful, direct, show us. Nothing strange about it. So why had he walked away? A few people assumed it was some kind of lesson, a setup. They waited for Bruce Lee to circle back and explain what he'd done. Others assumed they'd missed something, a signal, a subtext. A couple of people assumed he simply hadn't felt like it, which was also possible. But none of those explanations felt complete. There was something underneath it, something that hadn't surfaced yet. Then one person in the room started thinking about it differently. Not about what Bruce Lee had done, about why. And slowly, not all at once, the shape of it began to appear. Martial arts, real martial arts, is not a performance. That sounds obvious when you say it out loud, but we forget it constantly. We watch it, we film it, we ask people to show us, and every time we do that, we're pulling someone toward a stage, away from the mat, away from the actual thing. Bruce Lee had spent his entire life resisting that pull, not because he was humble in the passive sense, not because he was shy. Anyone who knew him would tell you he was not shy. But he understood something that most people don't. The moment you perform a thing, really perform it. For an audience, on command, you've changed the thing. Not permanently, but in that moment, it becomes theater. And theater is not practice. Theater is not training. Theater is not the truth of the thing. It's the appearance of it. When someone asks, "Show us," they're not asking a small question. They're asking, "Perform for me. Validate what I came here expecting to see. Give me the version of you I already have in my head." And Bruce Lee, who had spent years fighting against the idea that he was a performance, a symbol, a brand, understood exactly what that request was asking of him. It wasn't asking for knowledge. It wasn't asking for understanding. It was asking for a show, and he chose not to give one. Not because he couldn't, because performing on cue, even brilliantly, would have taught the room exactly the wrong thing. It would have said, "This is about watching someone do something," when the whole point, the only point, is doing it yourself. There's something else worth sitting with here. Timing. Bruce Lee understood timing not just in a fight, but in a room. He read moments. And in that moment, in that training session, a demonstration would have flipped a switch that he didn't want flipped. The people in that room were engaged, present, working. The moment he stepped to the center and performed a technique, especially a remarkable one, the session would have quietly become a spectator event. You've probably seen this happen in a class, or a meeting, or a workshop. The moment one person does something extraordinary, everyone else stops participating and starts watching. Learning ends. Observation begins. And observation, passive, comfortable, safe observation, teaches you almost nothing. So he walked away. Not to frustrate the person who asked. Not to make a point about ego, but to protect the room, to keep the conditions right for actual learning. That is not a small act. That is discipline in its quietest form. Nobody left that room with a story about a technique they'd seen Bruce Lee perform. They left with something harder to describe. The memory of a man who could have commanded every eye in the room and chose not to. Who understood that the most powerful thing he could do in that moment was simply step aside, leave the center open, for practice, for the actual work, for whoever in that room was willing to stop waiting to be shown something and start doing it themselves. He didn't refuse the request. He simply chose not to perform. That's a lesson. Just not the one anyone expected to get.